So if you are going to incorporate a business in Canada, whether provincially or federally, it's important to be aware of the rules when it comes to this. So in this video, I'm just going to cover some of those main rules that you should be aware of before you incorporate in Canada. So for starters, if you decide to set up your business as a federal corporation rather than a provincial corporation, one thing you need to be aware of is that you can't just leave it as a federal corporation. You have to do what's called an extra-provincial registration of your federal corporation in the province in which you're actually doing business. So if you set up a federal corporation first, but you're located in Manitoba, then you need to do an extra-provincial registration of your federal corporation in Manitoba. Now, that's not the same as setting up a Manitoba corporation separate from your federal corporation. It's just registering that federal corporation in Manitoba or whatever other province or provinces in which your business is actually located and conducting business. Now, if you just decide to do a provincial corporation, then you don't need to do a federal registration if you don't want to. That in itself is good enough if you are provincially incorporated. It's just when you do a federal corporation that you have to do that extra provincial registration of your corporation. Now, as of the date that I'm filming this video, if you start with a federal corporation, it's actually easy to do that registration in 3 provinces that have a partnership with Corporations Canada. And those provinces are Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador. So you can actually just do that extra provincial corporation or registration in the process of setting up that federal corporation. Whereas for the other provinces, it'll be a completely separate step where you do the extra provincial registration of your federal corporation through those provinces. Now, on the other hand, if you set up your corporation at first as a provincial corporation and then you want to make it a federal corporation, that's a little bit more awkward because you have to do a continuance, which is kind of like a transfer to a separate jurisdiction, which in this case would be Corporations Canada. And then that kind of cancels your provincial corporation. So then you have to go back and do an extra provincial corporation. So if you do want a federal corporation, it's best to just start by doing the federal corporation and then doing the extra provincial corporation registration rather than incorporating provincially and then going to federally and then having to go back and do the extra provincial registration again. Now, when it comes to federally incorporating, there is one main benefit that stands out to me for doing that. And that is if you incorporate under a word name that you've been approved of, then that word name becomes your legal name, and that legal name gets protection across Canada, meaning no other corporations, federally or provincially, can register their corporation under the exact same business name or similar name to what you've registered your federal corporation as. However, if that's your goal, you want to make sure that you go with the word name right from the start with your corporation, so that becomes the legal name of your corporation federally. Because if you go with a numbered name federally and then you want to register a trade name, you can't actually register trade names federally. You just register them provincially. So if that's the case that you created a federal corporation under a numbered name, but you really wanted a word name to give you protection of that word name across Canada, then you have to do an amendment to the corporation. Unless you just want that trade name or that business name protected provincially, then you can just register it in the province in which you've done your extra provincial corporation registration. Now, in the case that you want to register a legal name that's a word name for a corporation, but it's already taken in Canada, sometimes you can just ask for consent from the owners and see if they'll let you register with that business name, especially if it's significantly different or in a completely different region in which you're operating compared to them. Now, with a corporation, there is ongoing maintenance. You have to file an annual tax return called a T2 tax return. And then on top of that, and this is completely separate from a tax return, people clump these in together, but you have to do what's called an annual renewal. So an annual renewal is just basically submitting some documentation to keep your corporation active. Again, completely separate from your tax return. And if you create a federal corporation, obviously you do that with Corporations Canada, you pay your annual fee, you do your updates. And then if you do a provincial corporation, the same thing, you have to do that with your province. And then of course, if you did a federal corporation or created a federal corporation, I should say, and then you do your extra provincial registration, which is required, then you have to do those annual renewals with both jurisdictions, the federal government and the provincial government. Now, the tax return, you don't have to file a tax return per province, per the federal government. That's all in one. It's just the annual renewals where you have to do 2 of them. Now, in terms of fees, as of today, to set up a federal corporation is $200 plus $14 to do that name search. And then in order to do provincial incorporations or extra provincial corporation registrations of a federal corporation, the fee for that depends on the province. So that could be free in the case of Ontario, that could be $305 in the case of Saskatchewan. So it's typically around that price range of $300-ish to do a provincial incorporation from the start, or to extra-provincially register your federal corporation in a specific province. So I know this is a complicated topic, but I hope this video was useful and not too confusing. If so, please click like and feel free to check out my YouTube channel here, where I currently have over 265 videos that cover business management and business startup topics, and with a focus on Canada and specifically the province that I'm located in, Saskatchewan.